We're in the School of Medicine at the Royal Free Hospital in London, and we've just conducted a physiotherapy workshop for pelvic girdle pain. And we're here to discuss the common beliefs, the misunderstanding and the treatment surrounding pelvic girdle pain. So Peter, I'd like to ask you, firstly, can you explain some of the commonly held beliefs surrounding pelvic girdle pain and why it's such an issue to some small groups of people?
Yeah, well, pelvic girdle pain is a problem that's predominantly related to women. It's very common during childbirth, and it's common for most women during childbirth actually that they develop pain around their back and pelvis, and that's just a normal feature of going through childbirth or the late pregnancy process. What we do know though is that for a small group of these women, around 7 to 10%, that their pain persists beyond after the birth process, and the majority should get better, and there's a small group who don't. And unfortunately what's happened is that there's a lot of beliefs that are associated with pelvic girdle pain that are linked to that process. And the beliefs are, because during pregnancy your ligaments become more lax, then there's become this very strong belief that the laxity of the ligaments is the cause of the pain, and so that your joints become unstable, and there are belief systems out there that the joints go out of place and you can get these upslips or downslips or shears or torsions that occur in the pelvis. And the problem with that is it creates a huge amount of fear in the patient and makes them not trust their body and start to move abnormally, and it makes them alert to their body in a way that's not helpful, which can massively wind them up and make them disabled. And we've seen two examples of this, where we've had two women who've been quite profoundly disabled with pain around the pelvis that has started around the time of pregnancy. And what we do know about pelvic girdle pain, James, is that it's common, but when it becomes disabling and as it doesn't stop, it's not a feature of the pelvic bones being out of place or them being unstable. It's a feature of the structures around the pelvis becoming highly sensitized. And that's more a feature of the tissues being sensitive, which could be influenced by issues like stress, high levels of stress, social stress, lack of sleep, altered body positions that cause some stress on pain-sensitive structures, issues around coming to cope with managing the pressures of relationships during pregnancy and after pregnancy, the pressures of caring for a new child. All of these factors, the interplay between caring for your child and work, these can cause massive stress factors that have potentially a very large role of winding up the nervous system that pre-sensitizes those structures at a vulnerable time for people. And the problem with the current beliefs is that they tend to create fear for people, where if we understand the real mechanisms behind these problems, then it should be a reason to reduce the fear.
In your view, what would you feel is the best management of these sorts of issues?
Well, we do know from the research that women who have a strong belief that they will do well after pregnancy do well. It's one of the strongest predictors of actually women not getting chronic pain. And I think out there at the moment there's enormous negative beliefs, both in society and within the healthcare profession, that pregnancy is a time where your body's threatened. And it's a time where your body's under significant stress, where your joints become lax and you become vulnerable. So one of the most important things is preventing these disorders becoming chronic or persistent. And that is to provide people with really good belief systems, of giving them good ways of managing their stress load, of giving them good coping strategies of learning to adjust body position, giving them creative ways of keeping active and relaxed through their pregnancy, and providing that support. And what that has an impact on would be to diminish the wind-up that can go through the nervous system, and not letting them get into some of these protective behaviours that we know can become very persistent and provocative. In the chronic phase, that's a different say. So if the pain does persist, for example, then we've seen two examples of this with people who are quite profoundly disabled. And what we observed is that there are a whole lot of beliefs that go with, the pelvis being a vulnerable structure becoming frightened of the structures around the hip, back and pelvis, which then lead to these protective guarding patterns which further add stress on those painful structures. And with that stress and fear and anxiety and lack of trust in the body, it has a wind-up effect on the nervous system. So people, when they feel pain, start thinking of the worst. And that in itself causes a wind-up. So you're caught in this terrible situation where you're trapped between your beliefs and your responses to pain that tend to drive themselves. So we look at breaking that process down and giving people a sensible understanding of what the mechanisms are, an honest understanding of what the mechanisms are, building the confidence up, building their self-efficacy, building their trust in their body, giving them strategies to learn to relax and move normally, to think of their body in a different way and to trust those structures, and then to return back to the things in life that give them value, which might be playing with their kids, going for a walk. And we heard someone yesterday say all she wants to do is go for a walk, play with the children. And so we will target those as the things that we get people to do it in a different way.
Now, we've been exposed to your very skillful way of interviewing and assessing patients that you've seen on the stage. And do you feel that healthcare professionals overcomplicate the treatment and management of pelvic girdle pain? Because one of the two main comments from the two patients we've seen, they've been surprised on how easy it is to change.
Well,
do you find this?
Yeah, I do. And I think probably of any part of the body, the pelvis is the most mystified part. We have all these systems like the 13, I don't know how many axes of the pelvis there is. You know, all these possibilities of how things can go wrong. And all that does is creates this mystique around the pelvis. And this idea that it's a region not to be trusted. Where in actual fact, the mechanisms that drive pain are relatively straightforward and they can have a powerful influence on someone's body. So I do think we've massively overcomplicated this region. When we come back to look at what the evidence tells us, then the kinds of interventions that are likely to be helpful and not having someone trying to put your pelvis back in place and not trying to stabilize your pelvis, which is a big belief out there, but in actual fact to develop a confidence in the body, to learn to relax in a normal way, and to start viewing the body as a part of the region of the body that is strong and robust and resilient and should be trusted.
Now, talking about this biomedical model of the treatment of pelvic girdle pain, historically, how do you feel this has reached the stage that it is? Because it's not managed well and it's overcomplicated.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think because the majority of pelvic girdle pain disorders cannot be diagnosed, it's left this vacuum, and the vacuum's been filled with all kinds of groups who are trying to find meaning behind it. And often, I think unintentionally, what's happened with that is that they've developed these very complicated systems around identifying these changes in the pelvis, which very few people can identify, no one can agree on. The tests are not valid or reliable, but they persist because of this need for people to have understanding of the meaning of why they're in pain. So I think it's driven from that and the quest for healthcare practitioners to provide meaning. The problem is often the explanations given do nothing more than ramping up their anxiety and fear and distrust of the body of a region that should be trusted.
Now, a commonly held belief by healthcare professionals is that the pelvis is unstable, and they're very effective in communicating that fear to patients, which obviously, again, ramps up their pain. What should we be doing as healthcare professionals to decrease this fear?
Well, you know, it's true. What we do know is that ligament laxity is part of pregnancy, but we do know that there's no relationship between how lax your ligaments are and your pain levels and disability levels. And so even though laxity occurs during pregnancy, it's not a predictor of being in pain or being disabled. The things that are a predictor are things like your tissue being more sensitized. So there are studies now that are being carried out which has shown that tissue sensitivity is a strong predictor, that lower pain thresholds are a strong predictor, but ligament laxity isn't. So I think we've got to look really closely at the evidence and say we have to stop those belief systems because they're not evidence-based. And there are a number of studies now that have looked at very accurate measures of pelvic mobility in women with and without pain, and there is no more mobility in someone with pain than without pain. So we really have to desist from that belief because one, it's not true, it's not valid. We can't reliably measure these things anyway, and most importantly, it can actually leave people very vulnerable and fearful and not trusting their body. That will further perpetuate a pain process.
And lastly, one final comment about the cognitive functional therapy approach to pelvic girdle pain. We've seen how functional you approach the issues that patients have and how quickly you integrate this into patient day-to-day life. Do you feel this is the best way forward?
Well, it's the best way we know at the moment, but it seems to be very effective. The essence of this approach is to consider all the factors that might be involved. And we've seen a lady today who's under a huge amount of social stress. She's frightened of her body. She's fearful of movement. She's highly guarded. She can't relax. She can't even relax to lie down. So we went through this process of identifying that these are major drivers of her pain. Give her strategies to relax. Give her a new belief in her body. Build her resilience back. In terms of understanding that the things that she fears are things that she can actually confront and do herself. And I think the great thing about that is it's not something I've done, it's something they've done. And if they feel they have control over their body, the ability to manage their pain, the ability to function and do the things in life that they value, and they have control, then that's a way of breaking that cycle. That's got to be good.
If there is one message you could deliver, firstly to healthcare professionals and particularly GPs and doctors, what would that be? And secondly, what is the message to patients in their management?
Probably for both. Let's stop perpetuating the myth. The structures of the pelvis are a robust, strong, resilient part of the body that should be trusted. Pain in the pelvis does not mean your structures are vulnerable. They mean they're sensitized. Let's work at strategies of building up the self-efficacy and the confidence and the hope back into patients that, one, if they do have pain, it can be managed effectively with simple strategies. That, two, that the natural history of these disorders is very good, and we have to support people through that process to minimize the sense of fear, the sense of threat, the sense of vulnerability that they may feel around having pain around that, really stressful period of having a child. And if we can do that, I think we'll see a big decline in the amount of chronicity that we have seen associated with these disorders.
Well, if the progress that these two patients have seen is anything to go by, I think the future looks very bright, and I wish you every success in the future, your research and the effectiveness of which you're delivering your message to healthcare professionals. Peter, thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you.